Hi everyone. So the purpose of me making this video is to talk about the general symptoms of ataxia, and I'll give you a brief overview of how my ataxia is and symptoms. But I just wanted to be clear on the general symptoms of ataxia and how certain ataxias may differ from each other. Um, And I am focused specifically on the hereditary forms like Friedreich's ataxia, spinocerebellar ataxia, episodic ataxia. They're all hereditary ataxias. So I know more in regards to those ataxias. So because I have an hereditary form. So I wanted to discuss the general symptoms of ataxia. Um, that we all share in common, regardless of the type of, hereditary ataxia we have. So, the general symptoms of having a hereditary ataxia, or even, acquired ataxia or any other ataxia, even ataxia caused by multiple sclerosis, but I won't get into that. Because I am more so focused on the hereditary forms like episodic ataxia, SCA, and Friedreich's, and things like that. AT. So I wanted to uh, raise awareness of the ataxia, and this is why I make these videos and stuff, and I post. Number one thing, the symptom of having ataxia in general are gait and postural abnormalities. Okay. Every type of ataxia has this as a symptom. It's something we all share in common. That's why that's why they're all called ataxia. So, um, gait abnormalities. People with ataxia can walk with like a wide stance, gait. Um, so they tend to have their legs spread further apart. This is to kind of like maintain their stance and their balance, for support. So this is a telltale sign someone does have ataxia, as if they're walking with a wider stance, or gait, called a broad, wide-based gait, um, is a symptom of having ataxia. Now, in some types of ataxias, and earlier on in the disease course, it can be difficult to tell a person has ataxia. Or if at the time they're presenting as having milder symptoms. So some ataxias appear more obvious than other types of ataxias. Um, the more obvious types of ataxias, you can obviously tell that there's something really going on. The more milder forms, it's more difficult, or the more less obvious forms, it's more difficult to tell that they actually have an ataxia. This can be hard, because, and everyone's on a different journey. Every type of ataxia is hard in its own way. So I don't want to, say this one's worse than the other, because we're all battling something, okay? And we all tend to think that, you know, well, my ataxia is worse than yours because I'm confined to a wheelchair and whatnot. Even someone that has a less obvious ataxia are going through their battles and their struggles, whether if that's with the ataxia itself or with something else associated with their specific form of ataxia that you may not be dealing with. So it's really not the right thing to say, well, I got it worse than you, or playing the competitive attitude towards different forms of ataxias, because they are all similar. in some ways, and they differ in some ways. And we're all just going through something. So the less obvious forms can be difficult in a way where you are definitely trying to receive a diagnosis. And even the obvious forms can have this difficulty too, because people are like unfamiliar with, because it's a rare disease and people are unfamiliar with ataxia in general. But those with the less obvious ones have increasingly more difficulty because they it doesn't seem as obvious, so they're more prone to having other misdiagnoses. And not that the obvious forms can't, but it's just that, based on my experience, having a less obvious ataxia, it's hard to pinpoint what, there's something going on because it's not clear and it's not obvious. You can go to a neurological exam or whatever and they say, well, I do not see anything wrong. Your gait's normal, this is normal, that's normal, and in the end, they're just, a lot of doctors just are uneducated about ataxia in general. But with the obvious forms, um, or depending on the progression, some may be confined literally to a wheelchair, while others have less obvious form of ataxia, which makes it difficult to tell if you have ataxia, or you have an obvious form of ataxia that you can definitely tell the person who's having difficulty walking. They're walking with a wide base gait, they're staggering, they're looking like they're drunk or whatever, because of that. So, um, so that's symptom of ataxia. And that's how ataxia got its name. It's without order. It causes a lack of coordination and balance. So all ataxias share that in common. Okay. Now, the other one is that goes along with it is postural abnormalities. This is when you have trouble maintaining upright posture, like, being upright. So those that have ataxia tend to like stoop over. They can have their arms out like this because they're like trying to catch themselves from falling or trying to maintain their balance. And they may frequently look to the ground too, to their feet, to make sure that they don't trip over things or that they lose their balance. These are postural abnormalities that can go along with having ataxia, because you feel so unsteady that you are trying to, it's just a way of trying to maintain balance. Okay, so it's not just the gait abnormalities, but postural abnormalities go along with it. Another thing common in all types of ataxias is eye movement disorders. So disorders like nystagmus, having crossed eyes, or other eye problems can go along with various forms of ataxia. Eye problems and vision problems can be different depending on the type of ataxia you have as well. But some people lose their vision, some people get blind, literally, and some people just have eye movement problems, some people have trouble seeing clearly. So it just really kind of like depends. But eye movement problems and vision problems is definitely a factor when it comes to having ataxia. Now, another symptom is trouble with your speech. Now, ataxia affects every muscle in your body, so this includes speech and swallowing difficulty. Labored breathing can be a sign of having a severe ataxia as it progresses into advanced stages and certain types. being eventually bedbound. It affects every muscle in your body. So, like, you may have trouble with eating, you have choke, you have trouble with swallowing, you have trouble, you have labored breathing, you can have trouble with um, uh, every muscle in your body. You can have trouble with your speech because the muscles in your mouth and tongue um, are also affected by ataxia, and this can lead to unclear speech or slurring, like if you're drunk, which leads to another symptom. A lot of ataxias are affected by the cerebellum, which is in the back of the brain, like located right here, the little brain. So it's responsible for muscle control, coordination, and balance, and all that stuff. So that's the part of the brain that primarily deteriorates when it comes to hereditary ataxias. And on brain imaging, it can appear like blacked out or like there are significant cracks within your cerebellum, indicating that the cerebellum is shrinking. Okay. Now, the tricky thing is that some people have reported cervical spinal cord thinning as well, and some forms of ataxia, depending on the type you got. Others literally report like the cortex actually deteriorating as well, and some forms of ataxias too. So to me, it's just not limited to your cerebellum. It primarily does affect the cerebellum, but there could be extra, however you want to call it, extra symptoms or signs that can go along with having a specific hereditary ataxia. Now, when this happens, a lot of people often report having seizures and dementia in advanced stages or in severe forms of ataxia. Seizures and dementia can often occur in severe forms of spinocerebellar ataxia. So cognitive issues has been reported in certain types of ataxias. Now, depending on your specific gene and genetic mutation, cognitive impairments are not associated with every form of ataxia. Um, it can affect every muscle. Some people have it affect their heart muscle, and some types of ataxia, specifically in Friedreich's ataxia. But some people get, specifically in spinocerebellar ataxia, some people have it up here where they actually get dementia and other cognitive impairments. So it's complicated, but these are the general symptoms. While people with Friedreich ataxia can develop heart disease and diabetes because of their type of ataxia, others can have cognitive impairments, dementia, seizures, and for people with Friedreich's ataxia aren't affected cognitively. So it really depends on the type of ataxia you got to be affected in certain ways. That's something I want to go over. It's not a one-way street for all types. There are certain types that affect you in certain ways. There are certain types that affect you in different ways. So, another one I'd like to address is vertigo and dizziness. Frequent symptom in certain types of ataxias is vertigo and dizziness. Specifically in episodic ataxia type 2, it's a very pronounced factor in having episodic ataxias. Dizziness, seizures can occur in episodic ataxias. But the dizziness and the vomiting is specifically an episodic ataxia symptom, and whatnot. Some other people with other types of ataxias can experience dizziness as well. So, those are the basic symptoms and also how they differ from each other in general without getting too much into it. But those are like the main symptoms. Now, how does ataxia affect me physically, cognitively, and all of the above? I'm diagnosed with the CACNA1A or CAPN1A mutation, and it causes episodic ataxia type 2. Now, how it affects me is that there are migraine headaches associated with this form of ataxia, slurred speech, gait abnormalities, postural abnormalities. My ataxia looks like it's mild, but I tend to have variable symptoms. I have a persistent in between attack, cerebellar deficits, like my eye movements, my some of my balance, coordination issues, and I have cerebellar atrophy, which is another symptom of ataxia. And I have the degeneration process of it, the progressive process of it, and I have severe exacerbations or attacks of ataxia, imbalance, gait trouble, slurred speech, and things like that. Now, like I mentioned, cognitive and developmental, like intellectual disability, does not occur in all ataxias, but it occurs in some types, depending on your specific gene and mutation that's causing yours. For me, CAPN1A is plays a factor in developmental disabilities like intellectual disability. It can also play a factor in cognitive impairment, and I have things like that as well. So that's how my ataxia affects me. So primarily, yeah, that's just a brief overview on how it works with my ataxia. So anyways, I wanted to go over this video about the symptoms and whatnot, and I hope I brought you some little bit of insight, and I'll see you soon. Bye now.